with Bert W. Weesner of 2005 Sunnyside Avenue, Lansing, 48910. Bert's phone number is area code 517-485-9760. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing on November 13th, 1990. This is tape number 1 and the only tape.
Bert, if you would just give us your name and your address and your phone number, please.
Bert W. Weesner. I live at 2005 Sunnyside in Lansing, and my phone is 485-9760.
Okay, what's your zip over there?
49810, or 48910, excuse me.
48910.
Right.
Okay. Now, just take us back, if you would, Bert, to when you started and what you were doing.
I started in 1941, May of 1941. I hired in with Orla Bender, and that was over in final assembly.
Okay.
I was in the inspection area.
Oh, okay.
And I was there for about 6 months. And I was there when the union started. I mean, they were doing the recruiting, and I was told if you walk, when they were trying to recruit me, they got my attention by saying what would happen if you walked out in the yard and that big pile of 10 or 12-foot frames fell over on you.
Okay.
Said you have a habit of doing that. Well, that guy got the message. I joined the union, but I wasn't a very good member, I'll be honest.
Okay.
I wasn't a very good member. And about 6 months later, I was transferred to Plant 2,
All right.
working for Mr. Wilcox and Alex Ratzloff.
Now, over in the car assembly plant, Bert,
I was
you were inspecting?
I was inspecting. I was in the pit.
Okay.
I was a little over 6 foot tall. I was looking for everything from the front end, the ball joints and so on, all the way back, inspecting the entire, and about 14 different points I had to inspect underneath the car. And I worked in the stoop. It was about a 5-foot pit, and I'm about 6'1".
Were you bumping your head all?
I was bumping my head, and I worked in the crouch daily.
Oh, my gracious.
On the up above me, the man that was doing the upper inspection was called Shorty. He was a man that didn't stand much over 5 foot. He may have stood 5'3" or 4". And he had to use a ladder to get up to inspect the top of the cars.
Well, why
So-
didn't we switch jobs?
Because I don't think at that time they had as much concern for the manpower.
Isn't that
In
interesting?
fact, that was one thing that led me to devote a lot of my time there, and I went to school to get the human relation aspects of how to treat people.
Okay.
It's now known commonly as the Japanese form of management, but
Yeah.
that really is American form of management that they improved upon. But
Well, then, did you spend your whole time then in the pit while you were there in the car assembly plant?
yes, I did. The entire time was spent down in the pit.
See, was that in the old assembly building?
Yes, 52 or 58, I think. I'm not sure of the number.
Maybe 16, maybe.
May have been 16.
Yeah. Okay.
But it was the old assembly building.
The old wooden building.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And you must have been way down towards the end of the line.
Well, no, I was the final. I was when they was driving off the line at the
Okay.
end, just as they finished the cars. I was the last pit
All
inspector.
right. So you were way at the south end of the building.
Yeah,
then.
right.
Okay. All right. How you remember who your boss was?
I don't remember.
How did the bosses treat you in those days?
Well, we were there to be there for a job, and as far as human, they didn't treat you as human being. They really didn't.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know anything about how to treat a person.
Okay.
You were another piece of machinery as far as they were
Yeah.
concerned.
Did you have any break time or those kinds of things available to you, Bert?
Oh yes, you'd get a break ever so often. Shorty got his breaks quite frequently. He would come in sober and he'd go home drunk every day.
Oh, gosh.
But he always brought a bottle of, looked like milk, a milk bottle painted white.
Yeah.
And in it he he either had vodka, had something, he didn't on his breath, and he'd crawl back underneath the floor and take a drink, and when time he got to go home at night, he was pretty well riding high.
Oh my God.
But they never could catch him. They never knew what, and I didn't tell on him. I knew what was happening, but I didn't tell on him.
Yeah.
But he was, when I left there, he was still drinking. I don't know if they ever did get him. But anyway, I had become a reluctant member of the union, and
You had to join? Everybody
yes.
had to join?
Well, they didn't have to, but as I say, they had a lot of persuasion when they would threaten you, and it was a threat when they said, "What would your wife and children do?" And you knew that that bunch of frames could roll over on you very easily.
Yeah.
So I did join, but I never, that's when the Union Hall was over in Clare Avenue.
Yeah.
And there was 8 or 10 of us. One night we got sick and tired of them. We walked in and we threw our cards in, our union identification, said, "That's it, we're done." And
Really?
by golly, a week later, I was transferred to the Forge plant 2.
Okay.
And I was an hourly there. I went from that hourly to salary at that time.
Just boom, just like
Yep.
that.
And that was the.
What happened to the other guys that went with us?
I don't know. They were fellows that, and I don't know what happened to them, but I assume that they probably got something. Apparently that got back. Must have been someone was watching and knew what we did, and that took a lot of guts to walk up and throw our
Oh, I can imagine.
cards in
Yeah.
in front of the assembly, which we did.
Yeah.
I'd had my belly full of it, and I figured I wasn't there to take any more of the crap that they were offering.
Sure. Yeah.
So I didn't know. I don't know what happened to the others, but I know what happened to me. And I went
Yeah,
at that time. I went through at that time the first that got a hold of Campbell, Matt Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
Before Arlo Bender was he hired the hourly,
Okay.
and Matt hired the salary.
Okay.
So I became a salaried employee and Matt Campbell and so on at that time.
Yeah. Okay. So now you moved over to the Forge plant. Had the war started yet or not?
No, it hadn't. It hadn't started at that time, but it started soon after that. We started getting our ogives, and we made ogives and so on for the war effort, put on the end of the shells.
Yeah.
And but it started soon after that, because that was about 42 that I went over there.
Okay.
So it had.
So you were making shells or whatever
Right,
you were making
right.
over there.
Right.
What was your assignment then as a supervisor?
I went in at that time just a salary employee, 4 or 5, whatever it was. See, material control. No, I went over as time study analyst. Is what it was.
Okay.
I analyzed a time study that Stan Larson. I followed to see if I could improve on the operations and through.
Okay.
And I was on that job probably for about 6 months, and then I went into material control.
Okay.
And I stayed in material control until I left there.
All right.
I was there for several years then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you have any schooling in work standards or time study at all, or how
No.
did you get assigned to that?
No, I didn't have. See, I was wondering when I started at Michigan State, I did go out there to get some schooling.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I ended up eventually getting my doctorate, and after several years, 25 years to be exact. But no, I didn't. I just was able to read them, and I could read the time
Sure.
clock and so on.
And understood what
Yeah,
was...
and understood what was going on. And
Okay.
I could time the operations as they went through, the same as Stan.
Okay. So you actually ended up out in the shop with a watch on occasion?
Yes. I went in and out, and then I'd go back and write my analysis, and where I felt they could improve here or there with improve the production. That's what I was after.
Mm-hmm.
But I was only about 6 months in that job, and I went
Okay.
back into material control, obtaining material control.
Okay. Now, you hadn't been in material control previously either, so
Well,
this was another new place.
That's another new part,
Okay.
new job.
Okay.
And Alex Ratzloff he was our boss. Well, he and Mr. Wilcox They were our bosses, but they stayed over Plant 1,
Okay.
and we were, of course, Plant 2. Well, then,
Did you, in essence, work for him
yes,
in those days?
in a way I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I did.
The plant wasn't an independent entity?
Not at that time. It was somewhat more or less, but it wasn't completely an independent entity at all.
Uh-huh.
I don't think it ever was completely independent, but because C.B. Dakin, who was the plant manager there, his wife was Sherrod Skinner's secretary.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
And so there was an interrelation, but we were primarily almost an independent entity. We had our own, it's called GM Forge, it wasn't called Oldsmobile at that time. But
did you report through Dakin?
yes,
Or did you?
to Dakin.
You reported to
Dakin, right. I reported, my boss went up the ladder.
Yeah,
Of course, that
yeah.
time then I did get a promotion later on where I reported directly to them, but
Okay.
at that time, of course, there was Harold Van Epps was my boss. Don Stoll was one of the bosses. These are some of the bosses that
Sure.
came and went.
Sure.
And eventually it came down to me. I got the job of being the head of the material control there in the Forge in Plant 2.
Uh-huh. Well, when would that have happened?
Oh, that must have happened about 1950, 55,
Okay.
60 in there someplace.
This is long after the
Yes.
war had ended.
That's
yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Long
Okay.
after the war had ended. Yeah, we had a lot of peaceful production there.
Now, when you first got into material control, Bert, what were the kinds of things, do you remember what you had to be working on, and what you were doing?
Well, it was during the time I was there, we came up with what was known as the Bible.
Okay.
That was more or less a running inventory, and it was put out every night. Norm Cummings, when I got in control, he was the man that would work alone at night,
Okay.
and he'd gather all, they'd give him his production, and then he would put his scrap, and it's just a running inventory. We knew right over there, you could look at that column and tell you exactly how much stock you had for that particular job, and told you what the production was, and so on. The whole ball of wax, it was right there in front of you. You'd read it, and it just beautiful. You knew just where you were.
Was that a new kind of approach that nobody had?
Well, no, they had it, and it just refined.
Okay.
It was refined.
All paper?
All paper.
Done on paper?
All done on paper, and everybody used it as their Bible. The Bud Miller, tell you, he swore by that. He lived by that, I know. And so did the other superintendents. Joe Hartman was there. He was a head of the Hammerman when I went. Well, he was head of the Ford shop in Clare.
Okay.
And old Joe and I had about a third grade education, but he knew his stuff. He got more in forging than a lot of people ever would have learned.
Yeah, yeah.
But he got in disfavor. Used to, if his people made a nice production run, he'd give them a beer party, and the higher-ups frowned on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And finally they kicked him upstairs. He was just 2 doors down from me, sitting in a little office there, paper and a pencil, and that's all he had. And we were told in a way we shouldn't go in and see old Joe. But
No assignment? I mean,
no,
real
that's what they kicked upstairs. That was to get him to quit, which eventually he did. Had to quit. He just couldn't take it. But I never paid any attention. I became a rebel. I knew Joe before, and I still knew Joe afterwards.
Sure.
And I used to walk in there, and didn't do me any good, because I was bypassed many, many times for better jobs. But that's the way the cookie crumbled.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's one reason I took an early retirement in '71 after 30 years.
Yeah.
I ended up with a very bad case of ulcers and bleeding. And doctor said either get out or they'd bury me, whichever way I choose. So I chose to get out. But
So you've been with us a long time since then?
yes, and I completed. Of course, I will say this in favor of Oldsmobile: they were good to me, and anytime I had started school at Michigan State, and I complete, as I say, I started in 1950, Michigan State. I got my bachelor's in 1956, got my master's in 1960, all this done at night. And I worked my PhD, and I completed my work in PhD in 1964, 65, but I hadn't given my dissertation, so they wouldn't give me my degree out there. So I went to California, to the University of Southern Cal, and they awarded me my degree after another 40 hours out there. I had more than enough hours at Michigan State, but I had politics there the same as they have every place else. So, but even through all of this, the more education I got, the more farther I got from being considered for any promotions. And I can remember when Bob Cook, who worked for me for a short time, and Claude Basing, who ended up being superintendent over across the street there. Yeah. He worked for me. I had a lot of the people work for me come in. It was a place where they had to prove themselves. They all had to go through our department, or my department. But I just sat there and I'd gone as far as I could go, hit the ceiling, that was it. So,
what did you get your PhD in?
I got my PhD in psychology, but in management and psychology. I had management out there, and I took psychology when I went out to the University of Southern Cal in 1975, and that was after it left General Motors.
After you were retired.
Yeah, but I had really got everything. I really got out of Michigan State, because 40 hours wouldn't have begun to give me my PhD. But I did. I had management and psychology because I was interested in human beings, and as I stated in the beginning, something that's now called Japanese management.
Sure.
In fact, I came back and I put in at LCC. When I left Michigan, I taught at Michigan, LCC. I taught down there for until 1982, May of 1982.
Really? What were you teaching down there, Bert?
I was teaching management, but I had I put in the third year of management's down there today. You can go and get 3 years of management, or 3 years of business, and you can go any place, and practically any place you want, transfer in 1 year you can get your bachelor's. So that was quite innovative, I thought. And it was all strictly with the human being, in mind. It's, I tried to practice that in my department, and I think I had one of the most loyal departments, and I know it's one of the most productive departments at Plant 2.
Take me back again, if you would, Bert, to the material control department. How did that change then over those years that you were there?
Well, it changed from this. It went from manpower into mechanized, and the data processing started in there. In fact, my daughter is now 36. She was 3 years old, 3 years old, when they put what they call Big Bertha in over building, the old administration.
60, the old building, 60.
And I know we walked in there, they had the floor up and all the wires and everything underneath it, and you walked in these planks, so to speak, above it. And they said, don't cough or don't get any dust, the Big Bertha will die. But I took my daughter down. I can remember carrying her in my arms down there to show her, which she, of course, didn't know. But that, I can remember that very distinctly, and that's was the beginning of the end as far as the material control department is concerned.
Okay.
They had put it on.
You were then moving from the paper system, so to speak, to
and
computer-based thing.
They tried for about a year. That was about 1969, I think, or may have about 68, 69 in there someplace. That they tried to come in to replace people with a machine. And they tried for better than a year, and they finally gave up, and they threw the Bible and everything else out. And I don't know what form they have now, but it's certainly much different than what we used to have, and not as accurate, and not as the human beings aren't involved as much in it as they were at that time.
The Bible that you guys had created, then you carried right on up almost to 1970 then.
Almost 1970. The 68, 69 in there, we did carry it until 1970.
Yeah, okay.
And we were running it, and they were trying to work this, to work it in. But again, could have been a little bit of obstinacy on the part of the employees. But I had left there in 1970. I took the last year.
Okay.
I retired in May of 71, but I was sitting home one night in the toilet, and I just passed out. When I come to, there's blood all around in
Oh,
the
my.
toilet and everything else. I threw it up, and I had passed it
the ulcer,
digested. Yeah, my ulcer.
Mhm.
So that's when the doctor told me to either get out or they'd bat me in the face with a shovel. So I don't think that possibly my people, we didn't know anything about data processing.
Yeah.
We were skeptical of it.
Yeah.
And we didn't give our best cooperation at all. I know we did not.
Yeah.
I'll be the first to admit it, and I think all my people would admit it too,
Sure.
who are left. There's not very many of them left anymore.
Who was in your group over there, Bert?
Bill Van Etten, George Lear, Norm Cummings, Howard Rohrback, Margie Platz became Margie Bayer, Neoma Hamilton, Margaret Orvis, and what her name was was her. I think that's her name now.
Mhm.
Let's see, Roger Phillips was there, and Merrill Pettit. Merrill Pettit was always George Lear was always the last one in, and I had my office there, and I'd hear a banging of wastebasket. Look, there's George Lear sneaking into his desk every morning. He was late.
Just late.
Yeah, but he'd be 5 or 10 minutes late. But he came from Grand Ledge.
Yeah.
I think that's about.
Okay. So there's a fairly good sized group of folks.
Yeah, oh yeah. There were a couple of other women, but they didn't stay long after I took over. We didn't need them, and I did get rid of them. I transferred them, didn't get rid of them. I
Yeah.
just transferred them out.
Yeah.
It was surplus.
And where were you physically located?
As you get off the elevator, the first set of offices to your left when you went up the
Okay.
old building there.
Yeah, on the
First-
second floor of
On the second floor,
above the diary room.
above the dining room, right.
Okay.
I saw Louis Culp the other day. Of course, Louis and Pierce, I knew all of those.
Yeah, yeah.
Worked with them.
What about bosses that you worked with over there, Bert? They must have changed.
Yes,
What happened there?
C.B. Dakin, and then I think he was I think Tom Darnton came in there afterwards.
Mhm.
He was one of the boys came in with Don Burnham. They were called the Quiz Boys. Came from Detroit at one
Okay.
time. Of course, Tom married into the Olds family. He had a sure thing. Don Burnham didn't go any place, and he left, and he became general CEO for Westinghouse, right. Then after Tom Darnton, let's see, there was Elmer Carbon's the last one, I think, when I left there, Elmer Carbon. And I don't know just in the interim how many, weren't too many, but there probably one or two more did come in there.
Okay. Did you see any change in how those managers managed the plant during that period of time, Bert?
C.B. Dakin probably, believe it or not, was probably the most gracious with people. He knew how to get along with people, and I think he treated all of us a lot more as a human being
All right.
than a lot of the others. Now, Elmer Carbon did, too. Elmer was a good old boy. He came up
Okay.
through the ranks. He was hourly, and then he became superintendent, and he kind of took over the Forge plant.
All right.
Duke Hardesty was in there, too, by the way.
Okay.
Duke Hardesty. He was before Carbon.
Okay.
Because Duke left there and opened his own plant, 10 or 15 years after the end of the war, about 50, 51. Then he died just shortly after that, I understand. But no, I didn't see much difference in the treatment of the men, except Elmer Carbon was, because he'd worked with people.
Yeah.
And I worked with him when he was an hourly superintendent out there. And he was very considered, compassionate with people. But, and C.B. Dakin was, but Tom Darnton was a little bit standoffish. He was a nice enough fellow, but he wasn't one of the boys, let's put it that way. The one that you stayed a little length and you didn't get too close to him.
Was he more that way because he was coming from outside, so to
I
speak?
think so.
Maybe.
I think so. And he was one of them come in, and there was a lot of resentment. In fact, I resented because I had possibly as good an education as any of them, maybe better.
Yeah.
And I was being bypassed constantly. But I think it's because he came in from the outside, and he also married into the Olds family. Of course, they had no interest in the Olds at that time, but at the same time, it gave him an edge. There's no question about it.
Did you report right directly to those managers, or was there somebody between?
Well, I did report directly after Retzloff and Wilcox got out of it.
Okay.
They more or less were just shoved aside. We became more or less a non-entity of our own, over there.
Okay.
And then I did report right to the general manager over there.
Okay. All right. Now, Bert, can you tell me a little bit about how that organization functioned as an entity? How did they do their business, and how did they conduct business, so to speak?
Well, we'd have our meetings regularly, our regular staff meetings, and we all go in there, and that's the way we kept in contact. And we all worked. We had our own departments, but we still worked very closely. The
Was that a daily thing, or?
Not every day.
All right.
Not every day, no. That'd be maybe a couple, 3 times a week.
All right. Would that be in the where was that held?
That'd be held at the conference room there.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
but we worked as a family. There's a big difference between that and Plant 1.
Okay.
Plant 1, you were more or less a non-persona non grata, but over there you were an individual. And we did work. Each of the, and really there wasn't too much difference. C.B. Dakin didn't pull rank on you.
All right.
Tom Darnton is the only one that may have pulled a little rank, and I think that was unconscious on his part, really. I don't think it's planned. But we did work, and everyone, the Bible kept us. That's the thing, we get in our meeting, we'd start to open our Bible up. The one at Norm Cummings we put out the night before.
Yeah.
And it was on everyone's desk. Time the shift started, everyone had it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we worked. We procured our steel, we watched our scrap, we watched our improvement in the lines and so on, and all, and everyone, and there was no cutthroat stuff, really. We tried to work as a unit. It's an ideal place to work as far as individuals were concerned.
Who figured out what it was you were going to make?
That went through our department. They would get sales, give us what they wanted, and then from that, of course, it'd come down, and we knew then how many forgings, this and that, we had to make.
See, we were making parts for outside people.
Oh, yes.
At those times.
Yes, we were.
How did
Saginaw Steering, and so of course they were interrelated too.
Yeah. How did that get worked into your schedules?
Through the purchasing, or through the. It must have been purchasing department. I don't remember who gave us those. It didn't come into us directly.
It didn't. You didn't work direct with outside people?
No, we didn't. The only thing we did with the steel, as we call them, steel buyers, or steel. Well, Ward Jenks was with Republican, and Republican Vardis Band was with Bethlehem, and so on. We'd work directly in buying our steel, is all.
So you bought your own steel?
Oh, yes, we bought, that went right through us.
Okay, didn't deal with the Plant 1 people
at all?
Okay.
No, I'd go over to the Plant 1, to the the purchasing department over there, and we'd tell them what we wanted, and they would buy then accordingly.
Okay.
But we ordered what we needed.
Okay.
So we kept it in that respect. But as far as, and then we had John Lockerbie was the man, I guess he was there for a long time, John Lockerbie. He went out and he would check the parts.
Okay.
That was our contact that we had with the outside. But in my department, I had no contact except with the steel buyer, the steel representatives, reps.
Was Lockerbie, he would go out to the places that you sent parts to?
Yes,
Okay.
and check, and he'd double check, be sure if there's any bad parts and so on. That way we kept on top of it. And the minute they'd find something bad, of course, we would immediately take steps to correct it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was followed by Tucker, Al Tucker. Bill Mounts was in there too. Bill Mounts went a while. He was Bill Mounts, and then he became head inspector or something at Forge plant.
Okay.
But Lockerbie and Tucker were really the ones that go out, and they would, every part we made, they'd just randomly take part. And of course, if they had any trouble, we'd know about it, and they'd be right out there to take care of it. But we were just, everyone had their own job, and yet we all communicated with one another. That's the key. We kept in communication, and as I say, 2 or 3 times a week we'd have our staff meetings, or all of the heads of the departments, and we knew we had our nose in the other person's business up to that extent, but we didn't try to tell them how to run their department.
Okay.
We just kept them informed what we were doing and how ours and theirs would interrelate.
Were problems basically resolved in those staff meetings?
Yes.
Or were they otherwise?
No, basically there. They weren't ones you went in to go to sleep on, like so many of them.
Yeah. They weren't ones. Okay.
As I was saying, I don't know how I got an ulcer, because certainly I couldn't have asked for a better, more congenial group to work with.
Mhm.
But I think the ulcer came, though, and after, in 1970, late 69, early 70, they sent us back over to Plant 1 for a while.
Okay. As part of their job, you
Yeah,
mean?
as well, took our job and set over there.
Okay.
And that's when the problems arose, because then we could see the cutthroat stuff that we had never been used to at the plant. There just wasn't. We worked as a family, but over there you could see them, everyone cutting each other's throat, trying to get ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And that disturbed me. And I can remember when Bob Cook, that's before he became general manager, called me, and that's when they had a promotion. I think it's about the time Elmer Fuller passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And I apparently was considered, and I can remember yet, Bob looked, he said, Bert, how old are you? And I told him. He said, no. He's surprised, and I never heard anything more about the job. Now, he could have found out how old I was, but he didn't have to ask me.
Sure.
But he did, and that's the last I heard. And so it's short, not too long after that I left. I didn't work for Bob when he was general manager, vice president.
That's a few years later.
Yeah. But that told me right then I was cataloged, because see, I was at that time, I was probably 50, 58, 58 in there someplace, because 59 when I left. In 1970, or in 71, I was 59. I took an early retirement, and I didn't get any of the sweetener clauses. They had returned down everything, because I knew I'd been teaching nights at LCC, and I knew I was going to go there, so I refused any additional sweeteners, because I didn't want anything they'd come back and say I took them for anything that I shouldn't have. But it was only 2 years later, I think, that they came out and they gave much better in retirement. I was beaten out of $300 or $400 a month in retirement, but that's so, and I made it up down with the school. But I will say for Oldsmobile General Motors, they treated me fairly in this respect. I started in 1950 to go to school, and I ended in 1975. Of course, I was out of there then.
Yeah, sure.
But all the time, anytime I could get a class I had to have for my degrees, day or night made no difference. They'd tell me to take it. And they said I didn't have to pay them back, but I never took 1 hour, but I didn't give them 2. I made it, and I had a record of that. I always gave them 2 hours for every hour I got. But still, they were good to me. They didn't have to give that to me. And I never would have been able to have gotten my education if it hadn't been for their generosity and consideration. So I have to give them a lot of credit there. I enjoyed Oldsmobile, and I'm still a good, loyal Oldsmobile customer. I drive nothing but Olds. In the interim, I bought 2 Chevrolets. I bought a Caprice here back in '86, and I didn't keep that too long. I had one of their Vegas. And that was the nicest little car. It was a little Cadillac, really.
Yeah.
Beautiful little car, but I finally wore the wheels off of that. But I'm still an Oldsmobile man.
Bert, do you remember any, what I would call the normal kind of workaday things that would have gone on other than your staff meetings and those kinds of things?
Well,
Difficult problems that you guys would have had to resolve and those kinds of things that would have...
yes. Well, with steel, we'd have our problems. Then I would get with the superintendent, who at the last was Bud Miller, was superintendent of the Forge plant there. And we would work out our problems in steel. We had, and then I worked with pretty closely to even the main plant. They were doing our buying. We'd tell them what we had to have, and then they'd buy for us.
Yeah.
Chuck Stiles and Van, I forget what his name was, that was in charge of it here. Van Ness. We'd work directly with them. But
were the things that you would run into from a problem standpoint, they would be, do you remember what, like, typical kinds of things that you would have tripped on that you needed to address?
Well,
the problems of the day, so to speak.
Our main problem was being sure we had plenty of steel.
Okay, so it was mostly a quantity problem.
Quantity, mostly quantity.
Okay.
The only quality problem that we had them, I'm sure, but Bethlehem Republic, they were our main suppliers for steel for the Forge plant, and they would crop their steel generously. But we got one load of Japanese steel, and they had cropped it so close it had all that scarf stuff in it.
Oh, yeah.
And we refused, and it was it set for years over near Detroit. And finally the man from Japan died, and that problem disappeared.
Amazing.
But they sent the top, and all that stuff had raised to the top, the bad part.
Yeah.
When they call it crop it, they'd crop it too close, and they'd have that in, and ruin our tools, and ruin. So that's the main problem we had. But generally speaking, Ward Chinks, we dealt directly with he and Bardispan, and they were very easy to deal with. I mean, if we needed a 4 o'clock alarm to get steel in, we'd have it in. We never, to my knowledge, we never shut down the plant at all for lack of steel.
Was that part of your task to chase?
That was the main part.
Chase materials.
Yes, yes, that was one of the main parts. That, and to be sure that we had the right production figures. We controlled the production, and
how did people like out in the hammer shop, did they tend to follow the number that you said to make?
Oh,
or
yes.
Did they get carried away and make prices?
Oh, no. Bud Miller was he was in charge there, of course. He was in charge of all of the hourlies out there. But he went by the Bible, so to speak, absolutely 100%. What we told him, we'd show at the beginning of the month what we needed.
Okay.
And he would make it, right, make his allowance for scraps and so on. And no, they didn't tend to overrun or anything. They'd run to it, and then they would pull it and get into another line and so on.
Okay.
That was, I was trying to look for one of those. I was going to bring one over to show you, and I couldn't find it.
That's it. How about the handling of scrap? How was that handled?
Well, that went out in the back, and that became material handling out there. They'd take care of the scrap.
Okay.
We didn't. We would record how much scrap there had been.
All right.
And from that, then they would dispose of it.
So somebody actually counted and you got numbers back?
Alex Spratt and his group out there. Alex, Jan Gillette, Mike Potter, Virginia Getz, and so on. They kept us appraised of our scrap. And they would dispose of it.
So it was dealt into your little formula, so to speak.
On the little Bible, it told everything. It was there, just... I bet you Bud Miller's got a copy of that someplace now. I had, but my wife got after me. I kept it upstairs. She got after me, and I got rid of all of it here. In fact, I've got every one of my paychecks, which surprising, they're very low to start in, but I've got every one from the very first day until I left there.
Do you remember what you got when you first hired in on hourly?
I could tell you, but looking, because I just saw it, I looked at it,
Experience.
but wasn't very much, I'm sure of that.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it was,
Yeah.
but I don't think I cleared over 35, 40, 50, maybe $50 a week,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
But we lived handsomely, and I bought a 98 Oldsmobile first, 2 years after I came there. I was driving a Olds, and from that time on I've driven Olds
Yeah.
since about 1943 or 44.
Was there any evidence that forging was becoming less and less a viable industry as you were getting closer to retirement there, or hadn't that shown
No,
up yet?
it hadn't shown up except they were casting. They were
okay.
experimenting.
They
and
had started that?
Yes.
All right.
And that told us we were afraid, but is hush-hush, you know.
Yeah.
But they were doing their casting, and that was with the laboratories and the heat treating and so on. And I know Louis Culp was in heat treating, and of course Lloyd Pierce was head of laboratory.
Yeah.
And we just knew they were experimenting, but they'd always say they can never make them as strong. Well, they never can make them as strong as a forging, but maybe the forging have a little too much, I don't know.
Yeah.
You get a forging with the right flow of inside, and you just can't beat as far as strength.
Good sturdy thing.
Yeah, but it was in the wind at that time.
Starting to
Yeah.
show up a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Were people wringing their hands, so to speak, about that, or hadn't?
No, they weren't so much alarmed about that as they were alarmed about the, or I don't think, at least I didn't, I think they're more alarmed about the data processing coming in, or the computers.
All right. Okay.
Everyone is upset at that because they didn't understand them,
Yeah.
and they knew that this word had got around they were going to replace people, you know, and you didn't know your job was there and so on. But of course, what it meant, they actually had to put on more people,
Yeah.
pay them less.
Right.
They didn't, no one was as valuable to the organization as a person after the computers come in.
Yeah.
But there wasn't any,
Okay. So that hadn't
no.
appeared yet. Did
it was there, but we didn't recognize it.
Didn't see it yet.
No.
Okay. And were you still making components when you left for outside folks?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
yes. Mainly, well, outside folks, they're like Saginaw Steering
Yeah.
and so on. They were, and Detroit Transmission and so on. Those were outside folks, and yet they were in the family.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's mainly where we went. We made very few for outside the corporation.
Mhm.
Most of them were in corporate
Mhm.
concerns.
Remember any discussions about changing from hammers to pressing?
Yes, I remember that, and I know that, of course, being an old Forge man, we were very adamant against it.
Mm-hmm.
We just knew that the press did not give you the flow of the strength through it that a hammer just put strength. Every time you hit it, it gave strength. And we were more concerned, we wanted to keep hammers in steering gear parts and things like that,
Okay.
vital parts of a
All
car.
right.
And I can remember some of their first castings, they would break, hit a railroad real quick like that, you'd break. With the casting, with forging, you just didn't.
Mhm.
But we were concerned in that respect,
Okay.
and we never thought that, I never dreamed, frankly, castings would take the place like they have. I didn't think they would do it, but technology's kind of,
Yes.
can't fight with technology. They
No,
really did it.
somebody
and
did it, yeah.
Apparently it's, as far as I know, it's as strong as
Mhm.
the forgings.
Yeah.
At least it's
At least they're
adequate.
working.
Yeah. Well, they could strengthen, make places where they'd make allowances, make them bigger and stronger,
Mhm.
where they had a lot of stress.
Okay, how about, did you see general managers over at your plant at all? Would they come over to see you
Oh,
guys
yes.
on occasion?
Oh, yes. So, not after Skinner, when there weren't too many of them over.
Right.
Jack Wolfram would come over once in a while,
Okay.
but they weren't too over there. We were more or less up until shortly before I left. We were more or less left alone.
People just kind of.
Yeah.
Let it go. You say Skinner would come over and?
Oh,
see
yeah,
it?
yeah. Skinner would come over every so often, because he and CB were very close friends.
Yeah. Okay.
And he would come over probably more to see CB, and because,
Okay.
as I say, CB's wife worked for Skinner.
Did you ever get to meet him?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Can you describe him at all? What kind of an individual he might
A
have
very nice person, very smooth, very well-cultured individual.
Uh-huh.
And CB Dakin was, of course, CB had one leg, off. He had a wooden leg, but he was a nice individual too, very, very congenial sort of a person.
Okay.
Skinner was, Skinner was, well, he was way out of my class socially, I know that.
Oh, yeah.
But he treated you like a human being and so on. And I liked him as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought CB was just wonderful.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And yet CB, he was wonderful if you did your job, but if you laid down on it, you'd be cut in a hurry. Don't think you wouldn't.
Oh,
He'd lay the law down. He was the boss, but he was a good, gentle boss. He was the one that understood and tried to understand people, and he'd look at your viewpoint, and he never would castigate you in front of someone else.
Oh, okay.
And that was something.
That's.
Some of them, and because he felt, I think, sure enough of himself, he didn't have to come out in front of somebody else and lay you low.
Mm-hmm.
No, I have no regrets about any of the bosses, really, that I had when I was at Forge plant.
Get to know Wolfram at all while he was running?
Never did never get to know Wolfram too much.
All right.
I worked with his son-in-law down here at LCC, MacDell. David MacDell. But I never got to know Wolfram. In fact, that time, I don't know whether Wolfram ever came over to the plant. I can't remember him ever coming over there. He probably did, but I didn't remember seeing him.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Wolfram, he was, Wolfram rather, the story went, someone put a pop bottle in his car, He'd have once a week, he'd go to Detroit for a staff meeting.
Yeah.
And just beyond Brighton, they heard the thump, 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 stop, and they took the tire off, put it on, and when they got back to it often, there's a pop bottle someone put in there that apparently they were trying to kill him.
Inside the actual tire?
Inside the actual tire.
Oh, my goodness gracious sakes.
Yeah. Because they would, of course, he didn't drive, but his chauffeur would drive for him. And, so they knew they figured that someone done it on purpose, and I imagine they did. Now, whether they knew that was Jack Wolfram's car when it came off the line, I'm sure they probably did, because every car did tell you, you'd open up the glove compartment, you knew what it's for.
Yeah.
So someone tried to get him out of the way, but it didn't work. No, the main thing I remember but I never met Wolfram. Main thing I met about, he had his big ranch out west. I knew that, about the cattle, and he went to the same dentist that I went to, Dr. O'Leary.
All right.
But that's outside that. I really didn't know the man at all.
Okay. Let's see. Did the Forge plant have its own quote,
Accounting?
personnel and accounting? And
Oh
those
yes.
kinds of functions?
Oh yes. John Niehaus, one time, he was over there, and he headed up. I don't know whether he reported directly to someone at the main plant or not, but
Okay.
I don't think so, because he'd sat in the meeting. So I think our only contact really at the main plant was through our plant manager.
All right.
We would contact him, but
Yeah.
then he would answer to someone over there who was,
Okay.
like Skinner or someone like
Yeah.
that.
Did
Or
your,
Wolfram.
did your accounting bunch set the prices basically
yes.
that you sold
Basically.
materials for?
Right. John Niehaus was in charge of all of that, he's since deceased. Yeah, we were more or less almost, it's called a GM Forge at one time,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
really was GM Ford. We were more or less, we weren't as powerful as Oldsmobile, but we did have a lot of our own, we were people and had our own identity, so to speak.
Yeah.
But design, Stempel, I don't know, Stempel worked, sure, Stempel worked there.
Did it?
Yes, he was there. I can remember seeing him just once or twice, and the people didn't like him too much. But the
Really?
reason they didn't like him is the fact the man worked his fool head off.
Oh.
He never knew. I mean, he worked for everything he's got. That man earned it.
Mhm.
Don't think he didn't.
Mhm.
And I think that's the reason they didn't like him, because he never, 5 o'clock, he was still there. He'd be there till 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, sometimes midnight.
Oh my goodness, so he was a workaholic.
Yeah,
so
he was a
to
workaholic. So I think that's the main thing, there was jealousy.
doing over there?
He was in the design area too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And, but he wasn't there. I don't know that he came there. He may have been, maybe he was in Lausanne from the main plant. I don't know,
Okay.
but I remember seeing him over there. I never got to know him, never met him
Yeah.
as far as I know. But we had our own layouts, our own heat treat, own laboratory. We just had about everything there. Every department. The only thing is, I say, I think from the general manager from Oldsmobile and our plant manager, we call him, they were the ones where they would get together.
Okay.
He'd go over every morning. CB would go over, and Tom Darton and the others, as they became plant managers, they would spend time over with the plant manager at Plant 1 there.
Okay. So that's where they
Yeah.
they got their direction,
Yeah,
so to speak.
but we had our own intern, we had our own departments inside, and then we reported all to CB Dakin
Yeah.
and to his successors.
Okay. Yeah, that makes good
So and the trouble, when that ceased, when we quit reporting, we started reporting different ones over to the main plant. That's when things went to hell, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's when my ulcers kicked up and everything else. It was no longer a nice family place to work.
Yeah. So you had the differential plant come in there yet?
No.
When you had left?
No, that was after.
Right,
Yeah, that was a year or so after, I think.
yeah.
Yeah, strictly Forge when I left.
Okay. Now,
But I knew something was coming.
during the war, Bert, you started out with a relatively small plant. Didn't it get expanded
yes.
a whole lot
Oh,
during
yes.
the war?
That's right. As we got more orders, we had to expand to take care of them.
Right.
And we had, I've still got those E they give for excellence.
Oh, yeah. a little
Well,
bit.
yeah, I've got. I, in fact, ran across one yesterday. And, yeah, we expanded during the war considerably.
Okay. See, now before they built the building you were in, where were you?
Well, I
Or
came.
was that there when you?
It was there when I came.
Oh, okay.
It was there
All right.
when I came, and I came in, I think I worked for, when I got there, I think Van Epps.
Okay.
I think it was Harold Van Epps that I worked for, and then he was quite a drinker, and he just disappeared from the scene. I never did know whatever happened to him. That's the only thing I knew. I was appointed to take his place. And he disappeared. I knew they didn't know where he was for a couple, 3 weeks. And as I say, to this day, I couldn't tell you whatever happened to him.
Yeah.
But I know it, the first I knew that he wasn't coming back when they told me I was in charge.
Okay. So
No,
you
that building was there. I don't think it had been built there too long before I got there, though.
pretty much done,
Yeah. Because the plant protection, everything was right out, was outside the gate.
Yeah.
We had something then that they we were the elite, all that worked in the offices. We could drive our cars right inside the gate there.
Oh, so you could park in the plant,
Oh,
so
yeah.
to speak.
Yeah, and my people parked in the plant.
Okay, so every salary person could park inside
Yeah.
the plant.
Yeah.
All right. Did that pose any problems with?
No,
The
they
organization.
accepted that.
Accepted.
The hourly people, and we were very friendly with all of them. We knew them by first name. They knew us by first name.
Mhm.
And there didn't seem to be too much jealousy over there. I don't know. Of all the places I've ever worked, I think that's probably one of the most congenial places I've ever worked. And you just didn't see a lot of this cutthroat stuff. It's maybe we were too laid back. I don't know, but we didn't have a lot of cutthroat, and you didn't. I noticed at Plant 1 when I went over there. I was only there, as I say, short time till I had to get out because of my ulcer.
Yeah.
And I saw the blood.
Yeah,
That was it, and I came to. That was it. No, I have nothing. In fact, as I say, Oldsmobile, I owe the fact that I got the education I did and was able to teach for several years there in the college.
Sure.
As I owe it to General Motors and Oldsmobile, because they were, despite all their failings, they were very considerate there.
Mm-hmm.
But they never took advantage of any that I was. They let something go down the drain that they could have used.
Yeah.
And that was, and no, when I left there in '71, Matt Campbell came to me. He said, Bert, he said, I tried to get you in here. He said, I want to get you in personnel, because I'd had, my master's was in personnel.
Yeah.
And I had more personnel than Harold Cutler and a few of those people ever had. But he said I couldn't do it. And I said, why? He says, you're not a Mason. He says, you're not a Catholic.
Oh, my goodness, really?
Matt told me exactly that. Now, isn't that something?
That's really something, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Mhm.
And I wasn't Mason. I wasn't, I was man in between them. I had no axe to grind with anyone.
Yeah.
And, but I know that Matt tried to get me in, and so did Tom Shields. Tom Shields, a good friend of mine, Bob Sean. They all tried to get me in there, but they couldn't make it. I don't know who said no. That was after Mahoney had gone, Bill had gone. And I don't know, as Harold Cutler, who it was in charge that time, probably was. But there was, because I had a good working relationship with and Bender. I had a relationship with all those fellows, and we had good working. And they, of course, Matt was, I think, a very fair individual. Matt recognized you for what you were capable of doing, and I'm sure when he told me he tried to get me in, I know he did. We went to bat.
So when you first hired in, Bert, where was the office that you went through, the personnel office?
It was over in, as we went in the gate, it was the first to the left there as you walked in, our first or second off building to the left.
Okay.
And there's not only that, the medical's in there,
Okay.
and shoe store was in there. No one that shoe store may have been further back in, but it's just inside the gate there in Elm Street.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And as I say, I hired in the hourly, Marlon Bender, and then 6 months later, when Matt Campbell, and
was he in that same area too?
oh yes, they were all in. They were all in that same area.
Okay. Well, what have we missed, Bert?
Well, I don't know.
I
didn't know I had that much bull in me.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it is bull.
No, it is bull.
It's whatever happened,
I'm surprised I could remember that well, because after all, that's been 20 years since I've been out of Oldsmobile,
Sure. Yeah.
and 50 years since I hired in. But some things are very vivid. I mean, the thing, as I say, very vivid, when I was threatened in an underhanded way that if I didn't join the union, I'd have the frames. That was this message they were giving me. And they might have, I don't know if they would or wouldn't, but I believed them anyway. I became a believer for 6 months, and then that's when I told them that I was all done. And at that time, I didn't have any idea, I didn't know what was going to happen to me, but I knew that they wouldn't fire me. They were trying to get their foothold in yet.
Yeah. The union started in the 30s, though, and so in the early 40s, it was still struggling, so to speak?
Yes, it was. It was there, but it didn't have the clout, you know.
Yeah.
During the war, it didn't gain the clout there. It was in the, I think around the mid-30s or thereabouts when they started the union.
Sit-down strike thing.
Yeah. Well, they had a strike or two after I was there too.
Yeah, those were.
Yeah, but
like
they were
after the war. There was a big long strike.
Yeah.
But you must have been on salary.
I was a salary. That's right.
Yeah.
And didn't affect me at all. Yeah, because I was only on hourly. Just I think I've got the checks home. I think just about 6 months, and someday I'll bring them over to you and let you see. It'll give you an idea. It'll be an interesting thing. You'd show how the salaries progress. But I've got them all there. My wife's been asking me to get rid of them. I hate like the Dixons, because I said that anyone who could write a book, it could tell pretty well just what went on in those years.
Sure.
You didn't have to have too much of memory. It's right there.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff. Well, okay. Think
Well,
you covered it?
I think I've covered everything I can tell you.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it again, Bert.
Well,
and we'll
I'm
shut this
glad to
thing
have been
off.
here, Jim.